Good morning, everyone. Happy day to you. Okay, so today we have, it's more of a history class than a cooking class, but I'm counting it as a cooking class because we're going to go over something. It's a 3-part series. And the way it's going to run is the first part is this is on how to use spices and basic spices. I'm not the best with like a whole lot of spices. I honestly wish I had lived in India at some point because in Indian food they use all sorts of different spices. It's like spice blends and just amazing different things that you do with spices. I'm not the best at it. I'm kind of a salt and pepper guy, but it's definitely needed. And so we're gonna go over what salt means. So this is kind of a brief history of just salt. Way back when, salt was worth its weight in gold. Actually, it was in some ways more valuable than gold. Sorry, one moment, please. And that before salt, food was pretty much raw, like meat was raw, vegetables were raw, and people would cook them, but there wasn't a whole lot of flavor to them until somebody discovered salt. And so people would travel and, like, I think it was the Dutch East India Company that they started going around just right around like different places like Italy and France and England, and people would pay a ton of money just to get these spices. In order to they could cure meats, they would preserve the meat, and then also when people ate the meat, it tasted like it gave it this amazing new flavor that people had never really tasted before, and so everybody wanted spice. Now, we all have it and we can find it pretty much anywhere. And so, it's taken for granted. So the first part, and this is the history of salt, just to kind of have a background on why salt's important, what it's good for, and also just, to learn that, you don't want to oversalt anything, because when something's too salty, it's disgusting. It doesn't taste good. If you oversalt, it can really taste bad. And so a large part of this is to learn how to, when you're cooking, you want to taste as you cook, taste as you go, and even have other people, if you're cooking for other people, have them taste it and say, what do you think of this? Like, does it need more? Does it need less? Because you can always balance it out. Like, if you put too much salt in something, say a soup or something like that, you can add more broth or you can add more water, and that'll balance out the flavor. But you can always, if it's not salty enough, you can always, of course, add a little bit more salt. And then just taste as you go until you're like, oh, okay, there it is. It's perfect. And then you can leave it alone. The second part, I'm going to go over vegetables and how to use vegetables because they're healthy, they're good for you, and how to make a dish based around a vegetable as opposed to based around a protein like a meat or something like that. Now, you can use protein in the dish, but I want you all to choose, so each of you will have a chance to choose a vegetable, and this will be the next class. It'll be kind of in this format, that you choose a vegetable, and then you'll cook, and then you'll kind of figure out, like, how you want to prepare it, what you want to pair it with, and things like that. And then for the last class, I want you all to have made kind of a dish. You can just kind of show me a picture. If you want, you can show me the whole thing, or show the whole class the whole thing if you prefer. But what I want you to do is make your own dish based around a vegetable, based on, what I'm going to show you after the next class. And then I will do one, and I'll choose a vegetable and go through the whole process. Now, maybe if you want to wait till after I do mine, so you can kind of see how I went about it, then you can do yours as well. But I really implore you, if you want to learn to cook and be a good chef, this is the best way to start. But we need to start with the basics. And so right now we're going to start with just salt. And that'll be a good thing. So this is a brief history of salt. It's from Time Magazine. And they're reputable. So, that's why I chose it from here. And so I'm just going to kind of read it verbatim. Some of it I might go over a little bit faster, especially since some of the more salient points I went over. So what it says, salt comes from dead, dried up seas or living ones. What I do know about from living in Salt Lake City, it's Salt Lake City, and that's if you ever go there, and have you seen the pictures that I sent when I went to Utah, just in the salt flats? I think they said the country could live, like just the U.S. could live 8 years with salt, just from the Great Salt Lake. For 8 years, everybody in the country, everywhere in the country, here in the U.S., could live for 8 years with the salt just from there. So it can bubble to the surface as a brine or crop in the form of salt licks in shallow caverns. Below the skin of the earth, it lies in white veins, some of them thousands of feet deep. It can be evaporated from salt pans, welled down from brine, or mined, as is often today, from shafts extending half a mile down. The history of the world according to salt is simple. Animals wore paths to salt licks. Men followed, trails became roads, and settlements grew beside them. When the human menu shifted from salt-rich game to cereals, more salt was needed to supplement the diet. But the underground deposits were beyond reach, and the salt sprinkled over the surface was insufficient. Scarcity kept the mineral precious. As civilization spread, salt became one of the world's principal trading commodities. Salt routes crisscrossed the globe. One of the most traveled led from Morocco, south across the Sahara to Timbuktu. Ships bearing salt from Egypt to Greece traversed the Mediterranean and the Aegean seas. Herodotus describes a caravan route that united the salt oasis of the Libyan desert. Pardon me. Venice's glittering wealth was attributed not so much to exotic spices as to commonplace salt, which Venetians exchanged in Constantinople for the spices of Asia. In 1925, when first returned from Cathay, Marco Polo delighted the Doge with tales of the prodigious value of salt coins, bearing the seal of the Great Khan. And that's Khan. And so again, salt was really sought after. And it is very interesting. I didn't know that it began with animals, who would find, because animals, smart little creatures, they also liked salt licks, something to, that was palatable to them. As early as the 6th century in the sub-Sahara, Moorish merchants routinely traded salt ounce for 1 ounce of gold. Traded salt ounce for gold. So again, it equaled gold. In Abyssinia, slabs of rock salt called amoles became the coin of the realm. Each one was about 10 inches long and 2 inches thick. Cakes of salt were also used as money in other areas of Central Africa. Not only did salt serve to flavor and preserve food, it made a good antiseptic, which is why the Roman word for the use of salubrious crystals, sal, is a first cousin to Salus, the goddess of health. Of all the roads that led to Rome, one of the busiest was the Via Salaria, the salt route. which over which Roman soldiers marched and merchants drove ox carts full of precious crystals from the Tiber. Up the Tiber from the salt pans of Ostia. A soldier's pay consisting in part of salt came to be known as salarium argentum, from which we derive the word salary, which is, what we get paid. A soldier's salary was cut if he was not worth his salt. So that's where that phrase comes from. It's very interesting. A phrase that came into being because the Greeks and Romans often bought slaves with salt. With all thine offerings thou shalt offer salt, says Leviticus 2:13, because of its use as a preservative. Salt became a token of permanence to the Jews of the Old Testament. Its use in Hebrew sacrifices as a meat purifier came to signify the eternal covenant between God and Israel. In one biblical case, salt symbolized a lack of fidelity. In Genesis 19:1 through 29, two angels of the Lord commanded Lot, his wife, and 2 daughters to flee the sinful city of Sodom without ever looking back. I don't know if you know this story, but don't look back, if they say so. When Lot's wife cast a fleeting glance backward, her faith was uncertain. She was immediately transformed into a pillar of salt. In a Roman religious ritual, however, in which grains of salt were placed on 8-day-old babes' lips, prefigures the Roman Catholic baptismal ceremony in which a morsel of salt is placed in the mouth of the child to ensure its allegorical purification. In the Christian Catechism, salt is a metaphor for the grace and wisdom of Christ. When Matthew says, "Ye are the salt of the earth," he is addressing the blessed, the worthy sheep in the flock, not the erring goats. Take that, goats. During the Middle Ages, the ancient sanctity of salt slid toward superstition. The spilling of salt was considered ominous, a portent of doom. In Leonardo da Vinci's painting The Last Supper, the scowling Judas is shown with an overturned salt cellar in front of him. I've never noticed that. I'll have to look at that painting again. After spilling salt, the spiller had to cast a pinch of it over his left shoulder because the left side was considered to be sinister, a place where evil spirits tended to congregate. I think you're supposed to take it with your left hand and cast it that way. I don't think it's supposed to be with your right hand in that way, but I could be wrong. The social symbolism of salt was painfully evident in the medieval equivalents of the Army Vanderbilt Complete Book of Etiquette. As late as the 18th century, the rank of guests at a banquet was gauged by where they sat in relation to an often elaborate silver salt cellar on the table. The host and distinguished guests sat at the head of the table, above the salt. People who sat below the salt, farthest from the host, were of little consequence. That's not very nice, now is it? Salt taxes variously solidified or helped dissolve the power of governments. For centuries, the French people were forced to buy all their salt from royal depots. I think they meant despots, but the gabelle or salt tax was so high during the reign of Louis XVI that it became a major grievance and eventually helped ignite the French Revolution. As late as 1930, in protest against the high British tax on salt in India, Mahatma Gandhi led a mass pilgrimage of his followers to seaside to make their own salt. If the importance of food to a society can be measured by the allusions to its language and literature, then the significance of salt is virtually unrivaled. Nearly 4 pages of Oxford English Dictionary taken up by references to salt, more than any other food. A grain of salt may be a recipe for skepticism, but there can be no doubt about how salt has seasoned history. So again, salt and the need and want for it has been incredible throughout time. And so it's very interesting for us to find out, how precious a commodity it really was, and still is today. Without salt, I mean, if you watch any cooking show, whenever they prepare meat, whenever they prepare most things, it's like sprinkle of salt on both sides, and that's something even beyond like pepper or anything like that. Salt is something that is needed, and it really makes the dish taste that much better. And we're lucky to live in a time where there's no scarcity of it. We have tons of it. We can buy it easily at the store in various forms. So that has been part 1. So think about your salt. Maybe practice making a meal and just use a little bit of salt on it. Just, on the front, on the back. It could be a piece of meat. It could be some vegetables. I tend to stay away from it, but people even put salt in, say, ice cream and things like that. People put salt in chocolate. So, there's all sorts of things that you can use salt for. But anyway, this has been part 1, and I will see you next week with part 2. All right. Ciao for now, everybody. See you soon.